Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. We are going to be going over a Nico shell that I have been working on for a little bit here, playtesting a bunch of different varieties. So if you are a Nico enjoyer, Nico neutral, or a Nico hater, this video is going to be for you. We're going to go ahead and take a deep dive into the deck shell that I came across. Additionally, some upgrade tips that I have and cards that you can cut as well, depending on what route you want to go. So without further ado, let's go ahead and discuss the three big questions I always ask myself when I build a deck. The first one being is, what is the purpose of this deck? How does this deck win? And what cards are attributing to 1 and 2. So Nico is in a really weird spot right now, as she's not a true control style deck and not very aggressive in itself. She fills a very unique niche we would call tempo or mid-range in this game, and it is something that you really have to play to that strength of, because if you lean too heavily in aggro or too heavily in control, the deck itself has some faults, which I personally have come across a lot of the times, especially in this build. I think I'm a little bit too much control oriented, which caused for a lot of headaches and pain during play. So for Nico, our main win con is going to be Ravishing Finale. Of course, you really want to go ahead and get a really nice mill to your opponent by stacking up a little bit of damage with allies or other attacks before finishing off your opponent's deck with that. However, with this build in particular, it also focuses on an alternate win condition of just dealing damage, and it's something that Nico can take a really good advantage of in the early game with the big guardian attacks and some other setup to really allow for damage to be pushed through if your opponent's not expecting it. Next, we're just going to go over with what is the purpose of this deck, and this deck in front of you right here, the purpose is to establish an early game board, control the opponent's board through the mid game, and finish off with a Ravishing Finale or a Icebound Slam in the late game. And the way we do that is we're going to go ahead and look at our material deck here. Of course, we're on the Spirit of Water. I feel like the draw 7 is really nice, especially because it allows you to set up for good turn 2 plays. I do see the argument for running Spirit of Serene Water, and we will get into that a little bit further. Next, I have Lorraine. Between all the level 1 champions, there are only 3 that Nico really benefits from. And those 3 are being Lorraine, Tristan Xander, I'm lumping those 2 together, and Tenoris. The other ones really don't add anything special to the deck and require too much build around to actually have an effect with Nico. Before, I was always thinking Lorraine level 1 was kind of overhyped in ALC because that's all we had. People were grabbing Bulwark Sword, things like that, and I felt there was much better options, and so I played around a lot with Tenoris. But after MRC has been released, I feel like Tenoris is a good option, but probably one of the weakest out of those 3 named. Tristan and Xander fill a same slot. It's not really for the prep counter unless you're running Korhazi Trapper, but Tristan with the Agility 3 allows you to make an aggressive play by dumping your hand and get 3 cards back for a defensive option like Frostbind or Fracturize, or Xander level 1 helps you dig even more cards to help find what you need in that moment, maybe setting up for some mill or anything like that. In this particular build, I chose Lorraine because you want to capitalize on your opponents trying to rush you down with aggro. That is one of Nico's biggest weaknesses if you're unable to set up, is you just get run down by ally-heavy lists. So Lorraine allows us to run cards like Sword of Adversity and the new Crystalline Longsword. Both of these are important because they can get 2 attack by themselves, and that's something to really keep in mind, because 3 is a magic number in Grandarchive, and most impactful allies have 3 health, and we want to make sure that we can deal 3 damage. And now you wonder, oh, how do we deal 3 damage? Well, that just ties in with our title suit, which we will get to here in a little bit. So back to our material deck, we have Lorraine, Nico, of course, Backup Charger, which is just a GCR with a slight downside, but you do get a power cell onto the field, which can help in this specific build and some other variants as well. Now, GCR, because draw power is very important. Smoke Bombs, in case anyone has a defensive ally that gets in the way of your Ravishing Finales, you can go ahead and smoke bomb and intercept or a taunter so that they cannot go ahead and stop you. Then Terrafring, Viridian Protective Trinket, just because I feel like water might be one of the biggest counters to Nico itself with Ravishing, because they do run Song of Frost, Frostbind, things like that, and you just don't want your opponent to interact with you at all on your turn. Then, of course, our Magebane Lash, and surprisingly, the Tideholder Claymore. I feel like this card is very good in that last-minute push, or if you have a big advantage, you could bring this out and really seal the deal. Jumping over to our main board, it's always a hard balance between water and norm cards. I'm running 12 norm cards right now, and I still think that's a little too much, but it's something everyone can see for themselves how much they like. We're running 3 reprograms for Floating Memories, and it's a hard counter to a lot of those automaton decks, so it's really nice to have. 4 Resolute Stands, which is one of the cards that I feel like I shouldn't be running, and those could be turned into something else, because I feel like having this card in the deck is a little bit too defensive when I could have it as an aggressive option. 4 Stalwart Shieldmates, of course, for the Floating Memory and the taunt. 1 of Turbocharge, just because if you see it, it's really nice. You can sack the power cell you made with your backup charger, or if you don't see it, whatever, it's a 1 of card. It's not that big of a deal. We have 4 Cerulean Decrees. I undervalued this card initially, and after playing with it for the last 2 weeks, I'm a big fan of it. Sometimes it does feel very clunky, but one thing I always got to remember is you don't have to imbue it every time. Imbuing it is a nice way to gain more benefit from it, but just sometimes playing Cerulean Decree really throws off your opponent, and I wouldn't want people to hold on to it just to try and imbue it. It's really good to use it when you have it. 3 Fracturizes, a classic staple. 4 Frostborn Paladins, really self-explanatory here on this one. Frostborn Paladins, very good. Intercept, can become a 3/4, and banishes Floating Memory for Nico and draws a card. Then I'm running 3 of Guarded Disposition. This is one of those cards that I really wanted to test out, and on situations, it was very good, and the other half, it felt like one of the most worthless cards, but at least it cycles, and that's the important part. I just wanted to be able to dig deeper and, not have to worry about going down a card or wasting a slot. 2 Hypothermias, just in case. This may be also another card that I would consider putting in sideboard or taking out entirely. Just a very defensive option that I feel like doesn't really fit this current game plan. 4 Icebound Slams, and I love this card. It's so fun to play this on turn 2, or if you are going second on your first turn. It's just, it fills your graveyard. If you by chance to be a lucky person and get 5 water cards initially, that 8 damage is just putting your opponent back so far behind. I mentioned the amount of norm cards in the beginning just because I have some Icebound Slam math for you. So you have about a 37% chance to hit 5 water cards in a row with Icebound Slam, which is kind of low, but you have about a 67% chance to hit 2 to 3 Floating Memory in this build specifically, and that's the important part of what you want to hit on your first couple of turns, is filling that graveyard with that Floating Memory to go ahead and set you up for fast level ups and easy Nico banishing. Then we have 4 Lost in Thought, which I think is just an amazing water staple, and I'm super glad we have it. And then this is where it comes in as a power defender. I wanted to go more of an automaton route. I mostly ran her for the taunt ability at level 2 with Nico, but also whenever she's dealt damage, she gets that nice power cell. So if she's dealt a couple of damage and you manage to save her, you then have 2 to 3 power cells to use with her, so she can swing for 3 or 5 on most turns, which is really nice. And if you play defensively well enough with her, she's a very great attacker and very rewarding. Primordial Ritual, in case they don't kill your stalwarts, or if you have a couple of allies on the field that you need to just dump in the bin to get some more Floating Memory, a great way to do it. Then, of course, our WinCon, Ravishing Finale. I then snuck in 1 Sea Sprite Diver. It was more just for the automaton typing to take advantage of the power cell, but also a really good chance if you mill your opponents just enough, or a little bit later in the game, you can snipe a card in their graveyard, and the stat line is nothing to complain about. Then I have Storm of Thorns for Floating Memory. It's a really great combat trick, and I highly recommend it. followed by our 3 title sweeps, which we mentioned earlier. And the biggest problem water has is the sweep card is the worst out of the 3 elements, and it costs 6, opposed to the 4 for the fire one, or 5 with efficiency for the wind one. And so it's very important, as I said, you want to hit that 3 damage to kill off allies. And that is why it specifically chose Lorraine and those 2 swords, is because very frequently you can get those swords to 2 attack, and then immediately title sweep as Lorraine to go ahead and clear the board if your opponent is rushing you down. Plus, you're allowed to take advantage of title sweep having floating memory, and if you do need to wipe the board, you can then use that floating memory in your graveyard to level up into Nico, because it is worthless after you're already Nico, but as you're still Lorraine, even if you mill it or use it, you can take really great advantage of it. Then, rounding off our main deck, we have 4 Vaporjet Shield Bearers. These are a very unique card. I'm really 50-50 on them. When I hit big and there's floating memory on the top or a water card on top and I could put it in the graveyard, it feels amazing. Other times, I really wish they had more attack or more capabilities, because even with Steadfasts, my opponent just doesn't care about them. They don't do much. They swing for 1. Yes, they fill your bin, but I feel like it's sometimes a win more card, and I don't know if that's what we're looking for. There have been some really key moments and clutches, though, where I had one on the board, only 1 floating memory, and I needed to Ravishing that turn, and I swing with him, they hit, top cards of floating, put it immediately in the graveyard, and then I could Ravishing from there. Then moving over to our sideboard, this is a tempo hybrid deck just because I put Blademaster in the sideboard, which you bring in against very aggressive decks, or decks that are so slow that you could outrace them with damage with Icebound Slams, and playing Ravishing Finale just for the damage. There was multiple games that I was doing in testing where I would side in Lorraine 2 and just go Lorraine 1, swing Icebound Slam for about 10 damage with the Crystalline Longsword, next turn level up Lorraine 2, Ravishing Finale because I had 2 floating memory in there, and that's 8 damage, and that's enough to kill most champions at level 0 or level 1. So it's a really great tool, and it catches your opponents off guard if you do find the right line for it. When it comes to sideboarding, if you're not against water, I would take out Viridian Protective Trinket and put in Lorraine Blademaster herself, so then you always do have the option to go into Nico if needed, and you're not on a one-track mind post-sideboard. And then when it comes to our next one is Nullifying Lantern. This card hurts you a lot in this specific deck, but it is the only way you can really stop erupting decks if you can't kill them fast enough. One of my big playtesting was against erupting and wind allies, and post game 1, if I did lose, I would just bring in Lantern, and I would have a much better and more comfortable time against them. Then we have 4 Korhazi Trappers. A little bit more control, but I do like these. I would actually probably take out 4 Resolute Stands and immediately put in 4 Korhazi Trappers before everything. Just because having the additional ally on the board to swing is really nice, and you can stop some big attacks. Diffusive Blocks was my sideboard in for Guarded Dispositions if I felt like those weren't paying off because I was having to use my swords too much. Diffusive Block's really good card, still has that floating memory text, so I'm super happy with that. And then another Sea Sprite Diver and a Tidal Sweep just in case you need to play against a little bit more aggressive matchups. So that is my shell that I had. I've playtested it for a couple of weeks to medium to great success with it. I feel like its biggest weakness is if you can't kill in that mid game, you lose to decks that go super long, like Luxem Xander, Fire Merlin, and Rye. And then you always got to make sure you survive that early game against the ally-heavy lists, like Fire Xander, and win Lorraine allies and win Tony allies. So this is a very happy medium that I wanted to share with you all, and hopefully you guys can take this and sort of meld it into something that fits more of your style. And speaking of that, I'm going to go ahead and on screen here show a couple of ideas or suggestions I have if you wanted to take this in a certain way. And the first one is going to be a fractal build. I personally was not a biggest fan of the fractals, but I do see how they are very good. So on screen here, you can sort of see the fractals that I recommend and the quantities that you should put into the deck. It's a really good strategy if you wanted to go that route. You do have to just commit a little bit more resources to it, and it may be something where you're going to be lacking on allies, or maybe you're going to be losing some of your floating memory. Next is going to be the domain variant. I've published a video of me playing an initial list of this, but here are some of the domains I recommend in quantities. This is going to be for a much more control-y list. I would probably say this is full control, where you just 100% rely on a Ravishing Finale. So this is much if you want grindier games, but still not bad. It's a very fun list to play. Probably less competitive than the Fractal and my big Blue Hybrid version, but still fun, and I recommend giving it a try. And then finally, our third list, some suggestions I have, is more of an ally-focused. This doesn't really rely on Ravishing as much, but it still runs it just in case. This is more of your stereotypical water ally aggro, though, with a Nico top end. And then, additionally, if you are interested in any of these versions that I'm running, here is a slide of cards that I recommend taking out, because either in testing I feel like they're not as strong, or their synergy with the deck is not as cohesive as I wanted them to be. And you can feel free to mix and match as you please as you do these different variants. I just wanted to provide you all with tools to help you bring Nico even further, and hopefully we can go ahead and get Nico into higher standings. I feel like she is almost there. Maybe with another set of water support, Nico will be viable, but she is so much fun to play. I've had a blast testing her and trying to get her to work, and I hope everyone else has as well. And with that, I am going to go ahead and end the video here. Hopefully you all enjoyed the insight, and if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them down in the comment section below. Please share the video with any Nico enjoyers. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your time. Take care.